Hello, everybody. Laura Eisenhower here. I'm sure everybody's familiar with my next guest. I'm so excited to have him. We've known each other for quite a number of years. And before I tell you about him, I just want to say thank you, Justin, for joining me. I've got Justin Deschamps with me, everybody, from Stillness of the Storm.
Thanks for having me, Laura. It's a pleasure to be here.
Justin Deschamps has been a truth seeker all of his life, studying physics, psychology, law, philosophy, and spirituality, and working to weave these seemingly separate bodies of information into a holistic tapestry of ever-expanding knowledge. Justin is a student of all and a teacher to some, sharing what he has discovered with those who are ready and willing to take responsibility for making this world a better place. The goal of his work is to help himself and others become better truth seekers, and in doing so, form a community of holistically minded individuals capable of creating world-healing projects for the benefit of all life, what has been called the great work. Check out his project, Stillness in the Storm, to find some of his work. Follow him on Twitter, Facebook, and I'm going to put all those links in the description below. But yeah, thank you so much, Justin. Kevin and I, my husband, have been following your website for quite a long time, him for many, many years. And you're just constantly putting out just unbelievably important articles. And when did you get started in that again?
Stillness got started in 2013. Jeremy McDonald, who I think you're pretty good friends with, he and I were good friends for years. And my partner at the time, Julian, we had gone through a wake-up experience in 2010, and we were just like pouring into as many subjects as I could get my hands on. And, we started to have a lot of opinions about things, and we wanted to add our voice to the choir of voices putting out information. And so he's like, well, hey, why don't you start a podcast or a radio show and you can start talking about that stuff. And so we came up with Stillness in the Storm, and it started off as a podcast. And then a few months later, we started to post the things we were talking about on the podcast on a website because we wanted to have a resource page for folks. And then that just kind of took on a life of its own. It was not something we were intending to become so popular, but within about 6 months, it got a lot of eyes on it. And we decided, okay, we've kind of been put into this situation. We have the ability to influence people. We better get our influence game right and know what we're doing and be ethical and, discerning and these kind of things. And so, yeah, it started in 2013 and it really took off in 2015, 2016 with a lot of the stuff that was happening back then. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. What are all the different categories you cover? I mean, I don't know what you don't cover.
I know, right? I mean, the overarching goal of the project is, like you were reading in my bio, is just to use any information as a tool to know yourself and to better gain wisdom on how to interact with the world and others. Because as far as I can tell, the game of life, we might say, is the challenge of meeting your own needs, which are constantly evolving and growing, in harmony with other people. And often that requires eclectic thinking and the ability to look at multiple different subjects and have a command of them. And so, I use all sorts of topics, whether it's health, science, psychology, conspiracy, as a way to not only talk about what's being said in that particular topic, but also as a way to interface with the philosophy, interface with the psychology and the discernment aspect, because that's so critically important, I think, to what it means to be human, really,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we got together for the mass meditation, talking about the different conjunctions and the eclipse gateway. And here we are in 2020, already being hit with some pretty intense news. What's really standing out? I know the coronavirus has a lot of people's attention. We can start there and then maybe get into some other current things that you've been posting or having your attention on.
Sure. Yeah, well, the coronavirus, I believe it debuted in a couple weeks ago at this point, and it originated in Wuhan province in China. And it was initially, I didn't really know much about it, but I just kept seeing it everywhere. And, I've been a research into conspiracy for a long enough years that, when you start to see a virus getting promoted by mainstream and it's sensationalized, then, there might be some kind of agenda going on. And so I looked into it, and, there's, as far as I can tell, there's no direct evidence of people infecting people intentionally or anything like that. but it is absolutely, I would say, being used to drum up a lot of fear around disease and around sickness and health, because the grander program for Earth is to create a lot of suffering and pain, because, that feeds negative entities and it makes people easier to be controlled. So one thing that came out recently with the coronavirus, and it makes me wonder if they did this intentionally. So there's a information war happening. And I think one aspect of what's happening with the coronavirus is they're specifically trying to undermine our ability to talk to people about these kind of things. And so the coronavirus is a general term. The corona literally refers to a type of viruses that look like a circle with these little things coming off of it. It looks like the corona of the sun. And so there was a lot of alternative media people who were posting patents from 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago of coronaviruses. And they assumed, well, because the virus was patented, that the release of this, or the presence of this virus now in this outbreak, must be connected, and they must have intentionally released one of these viruses that they've had in their storehouse. Now, that might be true. I don't know. But what I do know is that the patents that were being promoted by some of these alternative media people weren't actually talking about the coronavirus that they had identified recently. So I think it might have been used as a way to get alternative media people to assume that there's some conspiracy, not necessarily do as much fact checking as they would like to do. And then now they marginalize their own social credibility. And so now people are less responsive to that type of information because they've been kind of burned a little bit. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
where the dividing line between understanding this would be an agenda and something, organic, because we see articles of the connection with Bill Gates and, different things like that. I mean, where do you find yourself drawing the line? Or are you still kind of on the fence with this one?
From a general suspicion perspective, I'd say there's a lot of indication to suggest it might be a manufactured event. It's happening at a time, it's January. This is a time when new ideas and new seeds of consciousness are being planted and kind of incubating. And so from a just kind of like chaos, sorcery, false flag type of a perspective, there's a lot of good reason to suggest that might be happening. From like a, investigator looking for hard evidence to prove that something happened, is almost nothing to work with. So I don't have like a whistleblower transcript or anything to say that this was released. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's kind of where I stand on it all.
Oh yeah. And that's what I love about how you work with information. You're very observant and objective, and you just don't get, easily swayed until beyond a reasonable doubt, something is worthy of, a strong, thought or opinion. You've been doing a lot of presentations over the years, and you bring up all sorts of interesting topics. What are the favorite things though, in this year ahead that you are bringing to the table as far as your research and work?
Well, I've been, I'd say I made a major shift a few years ago. I was really focusing on kind of like the external world, in a sense of trying to figure out what the problems were, looking at like propaganda and the law and, the legal system and, chemtrails and all sorts of the standard things we kind of hear about in conspiracy circles. And I realized that the effect of all this was on our psychology and our being, like our very consciousness itself. And that really, in a lot of ways, the battle was happening internally, not necessarily outside of us. And so I really wanted to understand that internal world a lot more. And so I started doing a lot more dives into psychology and understanding human nature and how our nature is weaponized against us. And so I made I would say a lot of breakthroughs in the past year about how that actually works, how they use mass media to manipulate individual values and your beliefs and how you act in the world. And then once they've manipulated that, then what you end up doing is you end up doing things that undermine your own nature and your being, which creates pain and suffering, and then they can use that against you. And so my passion is kind of like unpacking that and right now I'm trying to kind of figure out ways to push that information to the public in a way that they want to hear, because it's one of these kind of topics that isn't well acknowledged really, but it's huge. And so how do you get people to talk about something that they're not necessarily interested in and might cause them to kind of like a radical shift in the way they see the world? There's usually a lot of resistance around something like that. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Would you say because they've invested in it and so they don't want to talk about it because they don't want it challenged because they've already formed an attachment, or do they just sort of take for granted that that's what they consider to be just a part of human life? I guess it could be a mixed bag, but
yeah, it's a mix. It's like to speak specifically to it. Okay, let's get into the nitty gritty. I mean, you as a being, just looking at the kind of psychology and the spirituality of it all, in consciousness, you might think of the game of life as one thing, which is you're trying to figure out how to act in the world. Like you're in these situations, how do you manage your life? You know, for example, you have a physical body. It needs food. It needs water. Well, how are you going to meet those needs? You know what I mean? And so you develop a set of beliefs and behaviors to help you meet your needs. And the method by which you express those needs kind of determines the health of your life. So if you're meeting your need for food by going to McDonald's and eating a lot of toxic food, then yeah, you're going to be satisfying the need, but you're going to be making yourself toxic as a result, right? And then that's going to affect the world around you. It's going to affect your relationships. It's going to affect society. And so at a very deep level, food in particular is tied to the same neural circuits that fire when you're feeling connected to another person are the same ones that fire when you eat food, just in a different way. And so there's a reason why when you're watching TV and you're watching, because think about what TV is, you're watching another person's life vicariously, right? And so it's a kind of social activity. It's like watching somebody else. And so in order to keep those circuits firing the pleasure hormones you need, you often eat food in the process, which is another social activity. So at those two things, eating food and watching TV, are habits that we as a society have learned to express because we have this deep need for social connection with other human beings, but we don't live in a world that gets it necessarily. And so speaking to all of that and raising the idea that maybe your sacred habits that you use to comfort yourself might not be the best thing for you can feel really threatening for people, as you can imagine. You know what I mean? So, I want to be careful and delicate with that, obviously. So that's what I mean by it. Sometimes it's hard to hear,
Oh, completely. Yeah. And I mean, the targeting of self-worth, like you're saying, just how we should function in the world and what we should feel will boost our self-esteem versus make us feel maybe less than or small or not like we're fitting in. And yeah, so, I mean, when you look at the community, many facets to this, whatever you want to call it, anybody who's in just the realm of, consciousness ascension and the energetics behind it all, and then more exopolitical, more scientific, when you see just how this is being put out there at events and through, the internet and sort of the response, I mean, don't you feel like this has been a huge, wave and it's a lot bigger than we think? I mean, it used to be so small. Where do you feel like when you look at the bigger picture of all of this and how much work has been put out there and how many people, you can just run into somebody, oh yeah, I know the Edge of Wonder Boys, you could be in some random restaurant or be recognized even. I mean, do you feel really encouraged by the response, or do you still feel like it's pretty small and we got a long way to go?
I feel really encouraged, actually. I think just that like a kind of walking around in everyday life perspective, hearing people's conversations, interacting with people, it seems as though people are really open-minded. And I encounter a lot of people that have a healthy sense of disillusionment, we live in a world, I would argue, where there's a false reality that's pushed onto us by the mainstream. And, you buy into that because, you're young and what the hell do you know? You're just trying to live your life. And then you realize at some point that, whoa, wait a minute, this way I've been kind of mindlessly and obliviously living my life is actually causing a lot of problems for me. And so you have a disillusionment moment. And in that moment, things can feel unsettling because now you don't know what to do anymore. And so I see that type of behavior, because I'm pretty decent at good reading body language, and I can just see like that aspect of people just every day walking around. And again, I'd actually say that's a healthy thing, because that means that the tendrils of control aren't finding purchase in the people's souls anymore like they used to. And so, and at a kind of grand societal level, I think, here, I'll mention it like this. I think this whole idea of wokeness and political correctness and, climate alarmism and a lot of these like new activism things that have been coming out of the past 5 years or so, I think they have been engineered, but they're for a reason, because the cabal knew that consciousness at a deep level was going to start revolting against these control systems. And if they didn't find a cul-de-sac before the gold mine, or a place to catch people when they woke up from the dream, then they would lose the plot, so to speak. So,
absolutely well put, and that's totally, yeah. I so deeply see that. Very, very well put, and yeah, these movements, these trappings, so that we keep bumping our head on a wall and consider it to be, awakened. And so the passion's there because people think they're finally cutting loose, but they're just in another web in a lot of ways. And that's tough, like you said, because, you don't want to challenge people too much. And it's just, it's one of those things for sure. I mean, a lot of these, weather weapons too, and the controversy of, what's real and what's not real. When you look at the collective and just as we awaken our authenticity, I feel can start to counteract these negative technologies. Do you feel like, the events like the fires in California and Australia, wouldn't you say the majority is pretty skeptical of them being natural? Or, I mean, what are your thoughts? Do you feel they're directed energy weapons, or do you think it's a mixed bag, or what?
I think, especially with the Australia fires, I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they were basically like false flags, in the sense that they wanted to create a fire. They wanted to create a trauma event at a very special time in the year, which is, the winter season, when then there's a lot of self-reflection happening. So a lot of these things are astrologically, aligned as far as these false flag events. And, as far as I can tell, they caught, I think, something like 150 people who were suspected of committing arson on these fires. There's a whole lot of evidence. The actual Australian authorities, their theories from a mainstream perspective, do not cite natural causes. They cite, arson. However, the spin on all of this is that it's climate change. And the climate change social engineering weapon, or mass mind control weapon, is the world is a messed up place because of you, and you should feel guilty, and you should sacrifice all sorts of aspects of your life on the altar of trying to make the world a better place through climate change.
Yes, my goodness. I totally agree with that. Yeah, and so we see these weapons, and then we see just, other things coming through, people's cell phones. They might have a chip. They might be, a sleeper agent, I mean, and then we got, hybrid and breeding programs that haven't even fully made themselves known. Having a background with, exopolitics and studying some of this stuff, what are your thoughts about the bigger picture in connection to, dark technologies and them implementing the next phase of it? Do you feel like we're going to skirt that because of these mass meditations and how much focused intent we've been holding? Or do you feel we're still going to be witnessing these artificial timelines and eventually steer away? Because I can't imagine that we'd be stuck on a timeline that we weren't in agreement to. What are your thoughts?
Right. I think some major shifts happened behind the scenes over the past 10 years that, as far as I can tell, have almost completely removed the higher level spiritual technologies from the cabal. They still have some kind of like secret space program, deep state technology, like weather manipulation. They have various mass mind control, like psionic weapons technologies. They obviously still have TV and mass media to work with, so they still have tools to work with. But in the spiritual technology realm, they've lost the plot.
You mean like blue beam and stuff to manipulate people on that level, or
even higher? Even higher than that. So the blue beam technologies, those are like technologies that were developed that go into the body itself and manipulate the body, which then manipulates the mind, which then manipulates the spirit, right? But there's higher level technologies that work literally in consciousness that are like belief systems. You know, this is where religion has more of a control, where like ideology and philosophy has a greater control in the human consciousness. And so this acts in the more morphic aspect. So just to kind of present the picture of what I'm talking about here, you've got your body is itself connected to an energetic, what we might call etheric consciousness realm that has been described by Rupert Sheldrake as the morphic field. And so the morphic field is very connected also with the geomagnetic field in the sense that they have the ability to hold in consciousness information. And then your mind taps into that like at the collective unconscious level. And so what that means is that, just to really hammer it in for people, if Rupert Sheldrake did this experiment where he asked people to do crossword puzzles right after they came out, and the rate of people successfully doing crossword puzzles was smaller in the beginning, and it rose over time, and it kind of peaked like in the next day. And so his conjecture, which I think is accurate, is that what's actually happening is people are doing these crossword puzzles. They're uploading the correct answers into the morphic field. And now people the next day are like tapping into that. Okay. So they've known about that for a long time. And what they do is they use people as basically like consciousness uploaders and uploading bad ideas and philosophies and concepts into the collective unconscious. And that has been impressing down on us.
Yeah. Yep. And I guess that would tie into AI and sort of in training and mimicking in order to insert something that has more of a detrimental effect because it's a part of that collective ability, you know, where people can download that. And then there's like the voice to skull. Where do you think that kind of thing where, you know, they can sit there and be sending, you know, information to people's minds and instructions? I guess, is that the same kind of thing that you think is breaking down, or that's still?
Yeah, very similar. It's that voice crystal also kind of works in the body. So the morphic consciousness resonance is like the stuff that works at like the lawful level. So like the fact that, okay, this is going to take a minute to unpack, but when I had this realization, which was very recently, I was like, oh my God, wow, this is how they do it. So I think you're going to get a kick out of this. So you've probably heard of the idea that if you go into a haunted house, if you find a soul there that can't find the light, you can act as a kind of emissary for that soul. And one of the techniques that I've heard from a lot of people who have these experiences is that they open themselves up to the soul as kind of a channel, and they embody forgiveness energy. So they think about the idea of forgiveness and redemption. They embody that consciousness, and then that acts as a kind of like guiding force for the soul. And then, you know, a lot of experiences I've heard is like people kind of hold the soul in a way, and the soul kind of rages against being held and loved. And then eventually they just succumb to the love and stop resisting, and then they go back to the light. And so I would argue the mechanism, the technology there is that through your mind, you consciously grasp and claim these ideas. And then it works at an intellectual consciousness level, wherein the very fact that you have the idea in your head means that you've activated the technology, and now you can act as a way to like redeem souls. Okay. So that point leads me to the next one, which is that several years ago, there was, I have to actually explain this first. So the Vatican knew about this technology, and one of the reasons they created papal bulls, which is them writing down their intentions for humanity, is because they knew if they claimed those ideas in the realm of consciousness, those would start to impress upon people at like the same type of level. And so that's the higher, super high level spiritual technology that we have working on our planet.
Was that to hook people into religion, you're saying, in the same kind of way that you're talking about?
Right, exactly.
The royal family and going to the Queen Jubilee without looking at the bigger picture. Okay, yeah. So keep going. Right. So that's on the highest level.
Highest level, right. So one of the things they needed to do is that basically it's like this. The way these high level mental technology works is whatever group of people have claimed the ideas, the power to name a thing properly is the power to claim its power. That's the kind of the precept they use. Now they have it, which means if nobody else has it, then they can kind of claim dominion over that idea. And so that idea acts as a kind of like transmitter or antenna that points into consciousness at a collective consciousness level. So what happened in 2012 and the lead up to 2012 is humanity rediscovered the core ideas behind the papal bulls that were written 700 years ago and started writing them down and talking about them and making them conscious. And because of that, we reclaimed power of that domain of the human consciousness away from the Cabal, and they lost it. And so they haven't been able to guide themselves using those spiritual connecting forces for like 10 years. And I think they've completely lost the plot and they don't really know what the hell they're doing anymore.
Right. And so that would be like a siphoning technology to take life force in order to be in power.
Right. It's literally the like, your consciousness is itself guided by ideas and thought. And so your emotional energy is actually you. When you feel an emotion, it's actually you in consciousness focusing on a concept. And then you, by virtue of the fact that you're looking at something with your awareness with the concept acts as a filter. And then you feel what you're feeling through that awareness of the concept. So the concept is itself very powerful. It's hugely powerful. The way you think about something is like enormous, right? So as a collective consciousness in humanity, the way we think about our relationship to all sorts of things, the way we think about life has been hijacked. We think about it like from movies, from TV shows, from destructive religions, all these things, right? And they took all those good ideas and they kind of kept them secret from themselves. So they've been able to use all those super amazing, powerful ideas for their own benefit, and they've stripped them from humanity. And so,
right, definitely like a siphoning, harvesting, and yeah. And now that that's beginning to lift, it's kind of like we see all these crimes against humanity coming to the surface, although that they're trying to shove a lot of them back down, but people are too loud, not letting them get away with it. That's the great part. So does this tie in, do you feel like with implants, or, I mean, when you think of the number of people that must have been abducted too, do you feel that plays into some of those spiritual technologies that are also falling away, or are we still dealing with a lot of heavy kind of controller agendas that haven't even made themselves fully known because they've been working in secrecy?
I think that at very high levels of the Cabal, you've basically got two camps as they exist today. You've got the spiritually aligned Cabal, which is way older, and they come from like the Babylonian times. And they've recognized that the only reason they have power is because they follow universal law. Okay. And then there's the newer elites that came about at around the 1600s, and they really came to power in the 1800s. They're more nihilists. They don't believe in the spiritual camp.
Do you think they're the infiltrators of like the Masons and other groups like that?
Yes, exactly.
Bulgarian Mafia, kind of the ones that are funding both sides of war, the really destructive ones you're talking about.
Precisely. These are like the, if your audience is familiar with Faust, Mephistopheles, he's the demon that Faust makes contact with, who's so filled with toxic rage, like the Joker archetype. He just wants to burn it all down. It's like, screw everything. We're just going to, destroy everything. That's the level of insanity of these newer type of Cabal people. And so because these newer type of Cabal people weren't following universal law, they invited all of these spiritual forces to come in to correct them, because that's the way the universe works, as far as I can understand it. And so the spiritual Cabal had lost power to this non-spiritual Cabal in the 1800s. But recently, the non-spiritual Cabal, their ability to plan events in the future broke down because they needed that spiritual technology to guide the events into the future. And so what I think is happening is, there's an alliance that has also been taking old spiritual Cabal members and putting them back into kind of a white hat camp. And so, if you're trying to figure what's happening behind the scenes, if you're trying to figure things out from like a bad guy, good guy perspective, you're going to be really confused, because it seems like the bad guys are now the good guys, and that kind of thing. And so what I think is happening at a really deep level is that the reason why it's these false flag events and the social engineering just doesn't seem to be having the same effect is because there's literally a war between the cabals happening right now. And the good guys in that camp seem to be getting more of control.
Yep. I've heard too recently from a whistleblower that most of the underground bases are now taken over by the white hats. And he's not just coming from a place of research or this is what an insider told me. I mean, he's witnessed it. And he named all the locations and had the maps of where all these bases are. So that was really encouraging. No, that makes a tremendous amount of sense. And, but here we have these powerful events at certain times of year, particularly certain planetary alignments where, obviously they're just going to go into that dark ritual stuff. And I know you were interviewed on Edge of Wonder. I did the part 2, and you did an amazing interview about satanic ritual abuse and just the depth of all that. And I don't know if you can speak anything about Moloch or whatever god, they're worshiping, or deity, or not even deity, demon, or however you would want to put it. Do you feel like these rituals are also collapsing and not holding the momentum that they're hoping for, and that something like a virus or an outbreak is counting on the infection of our creative channels and belief systems to exacerbate it versus our ability to not let that virus impact us on a consciousness level in order to wipe out that, kind of engineered virus aspect? Yeah. So I guess my question is, do you feel that these ritual abuses and the MK Ultra and mind control stuff, do you think that's collapsing with the rest of it? And how do you connect the dots between the control of spiritual technology and how these rituals operate, or if there's a link like that?
Right. Yeah. I do think there's a link. I think that the power and impact of these rituals has been breaking down for several reasons. One, a lot of the Cabal members are recipe followers. They don't really understand what they're doing. They're just following the orders that they've been given. And so, when you have a system like that, when there's a compartmentalized system, things break down for various reasons. I also think that there's one of the spiritual technologies they've been using is discarnate souls, or ghost souls that they literally create through torturing people. And then they use like a type of ritual magic to deceive the soul into thinking the magician who killed them has power when they don't actually have power. And so what ends up happening is that soul will be used as like a tool until it figures out that it's not actually beholden to the black magician anymore. And then now it has the ability to kind of roam around. And so what's happened, an event that's happened somewhat recently, but has been happening, is that light workers have been going in and redeeming these souls and literally bringing these souls back into the light. And these souls were instrumental in manipulating consciousness when these false flag events would happen. And so I don't think that's happening anymore. And, I also think that at this stage, I think what's happening is that the Cabal has, the only thing they can really do is to try to make life really uncomfortable for us so that we don't do the inner work and we don't come together and heal and things like this. So. Yep.
Yeah. And to me, the power of that, is a frequency, an override frequency that can continue to break down everything you're talking about. And that's what it's going to take. I mean, what do you feel? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot about any questions that you don't want to answer, of course. But when you see just a lot of the division in the community, not asking, to name names or anything,
sure.
Or to choose sides, because I know you step back. I don't know. We haven't really gotten too much into it in the past, but obviously there's plants and ways in order to, put that seed of destruction in. And I don't think humans realize how powerful we are to just not accept that. I mean, do you feel like there's repair work happening, or do you feel like people are really falling into another trap of duality? I mean, do you see any encouragement and any kind of healing of what we've seen fracture in just UFO community, consciousness community? And when I say community, I don't mean it's limited to a clique or a group. I just mean anybody who's willing to dig a little deeper and has participated on some level.
Right.
And how people who are listening and witnessing this and what it's doing to them and pulling them this way and that way. Do you feel that that's repairing right now, or do you see it? I mean, I guess it depends on the person, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think at a grand level it is repairing because, in my opinion, what tends to happen when people wake up is they move from one dogmatic system of belief to another dogmatic system of belief. it takes a tremendous amount of personal fortitude to realize that, you've basically don't know how to understand why you believe what you do. And so you need to like figure that out before you jump into another belief system. And so I would say the majority of the population, through, no blame or anything like that, but this is just an observation, they're very easily swept up into drama and guru following and, putting people on pedestals and all that stuff. And there's a reason why. It's because at a very deep psychological level, we're programmed to think like that. So it's not a blame thing. However, what I'm seeing is that the leaders in the community we haven't learned how to work in harmony with each other in a way I think that would benefit everybody, which is no pointing fingers there. I just think it's an observation. And as a result, the audience is kind of like you were saying, they're like pulled back and forth, trying to figure out like, well, what the hell is going on? And so there's, like I was saying earlier, I think there's a healthy amount of disillusionment that's happening. And it's an opportunity for growth. Like one of the interesting things about spiritual growth, I would argue, and the power of truth is that the truth is a chaotic element. When you come into contact with truth, it destroys what is untrue within you and it leaves this hole. And now you have to rebuild that hole. And that's what growth is all about. And so if you're resistant to that, then what ends up happening is now you become dependent on some other parasitic thing outside of you. And so that whole dynamic at an individual level, I think that's been happening for a while with people, but now the whatever's happening in consciousness seems to be making guru following and that dogmatic type of following harder for people. And so we're in a state of healthy chaos, I would say, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Oh, yeah. And that's connected to the planet Uranus. It's the planet of chaos. It's like the wrecking ball, out with the old, in with the new, but it connects with authenticity, the truth frequency, 0 point unified field. It is the great awakener, but it's going to tear everything down and create sort of the chaoticness until the authentic self rises, which I feel is a prerequisite to unity consciousness, to represent ourselves and our truth and to rise up as we're all leaders. And I think it's kind of hard too, because I think people don't know who to, I guess, feel good about sometimes. And I think it's important to know that a lot of people in this community do not look to be put on a pedestal and do not want to be the guru and want to empower the individual. And sometimes the lines get blurred. There's guilt by association. If so-and-so has an issue with so-and-so, if you're even next to that person, well, you must be in this, thing or cult or, but yeah, I do think it's going to recover. It's really up to the individuals. Cause like you said, this is a really healthy growth period to begin to kind of step away and say, wait a second, am I doing that? Doesn't mean that the teacher or guide or whoever asked for it, but it has to go both ways. Just like the person that's public, are you posturing your ego? Are you just trying to get followers? Are you really intent and sincere in your path and your truth and what matters most? Because this is such heavy stuff. It's really, really hard to connect to these sort of topics and fall into a trap of just doing it for numbers or money, because this is so heavy and it's heart-wrenching to process. And I know you process so much. I mean, what do you go through on a daily basis when you're pulling together these articles? You just wake up in the morning and it's just like, boom, boom, boom. You have a cup of coffee, take a deep breath. I mean, kind of what's your process?
Well, these days it's a lot of self-care and self-work because admittedly, I take on way more work than I probably should. And, especially over the past few years, I didn't make stillness because I wanted it to be a business. It was a kind of passion. And then it turned into like a way to support myself. And one of the challenges with doing this type of work full time is that there's a tremendous need to survive while also trying to do the great work and trying to help people. And so my daily process, I work every day basically. And it's trying to find news and information and research that I think is important. So I tend to spend a lot of time, just doing administrative work and maintaining the site and things like this. And then a lot of my time is to research and philosophy and analysis and discernment and all that kind of thing. But I also try to take time to process at a personal level what I'm seeing. And it's, I have in the past kind of overshadowed that personal healing work with more information, more and more and more information, and I think it's the thing that a lot of people deal with because, in our world, we don't really have a cultural mechanism for deep inner healing. It's something you kind of got to go off into the woods and, so yeah, I think my personal process, especially these days, is trying to be very aware of what the habits and behaviors that I do every day, how they affect me and at a deep level, and making sure to take time to indulge my curiosity, to be inspired, to like make connections with the people around me. That's one of the things that haven't been so good in the past. I just pour myself into my work and then a week will go by and like, Jesus, I haven't seen anybody for like a week. Like I better go out the world. You know what I mean? So doing that, I think, is really healthy. And I think that's something everybody should do. And that's one of the things I've been really passionate about lately. I discovered that there's a whole part of your brain that's specifically designed to reward or punish you for your social connections in life. And, in various circles, we tend to be like, whatever, I don't care what anybody thinks. Or, well, those are unwake people, so I'm not going to associate with those people, but your brain doesn't care. Your brain wants you to have a really good relationship with everybody. And if you don't learn how to work that, then you'll literally drive yourself crazy. And that's actually the basis of, psychosis and things. So.
Right. Like the ego can mask a lot of the inner workings of our soul and what we're really looking to achieve. And one can just develop personality traits like cynicism or resentment or judgment to just make an excuse to avoid what might eventually catch up and create this schism between the soul, spirit, body communication. Absolutely. I totally feel that. So looking at a lot of the trauma, though, that we've gone through for thousands of years of history without a whole lot going on in the medical industry to really support that, do you see a big wave of, just seeing these power structures transform from the inside out, like hospitals becoming more conscious and working with like herbs or acupuncturists? Because I can't imagine that we can just starve everything. Do you feel like we have to heal it from the inside out? And if so, kind of what are your thoughts, or do you have a vision in how that's going to look without putting you on the spot about any kind of predictiveness of what the future holds? But we are generating our future through our thoughts and intentions. Do you feel like we have to start fresh, or we can shift this from the inside out?
I think generally like a good idea is to try to do it from the inside out, because in a lot of cases, the things that aren't working right in this world have something of value. So, the police force exists because we actually do need people to take on the burden of protecting all of our rights and, that kind of thing. And is it corrupt? Yeah, unquestionably. Are there really bad things happening? Absolutely. But that doesn't mean we should just throw all that out and just try to completely reinvent the wheel without acknowledging the work of the past. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of, because the like we were talking about earlier, because the like super high level influences are starting to crumble at a spiritual interface level, you're having a lot of kind of organic awakening happening on the planet. But it's happening kind of like quietly behind the scenes. And you can kind of see it. If you know how to read a person, you can see it because they're just not as satisfied. There's a little more angst. There's a little bit more frustration, And so that's good. It means that at some deep level, they recognize something's not right and needs to change. And so I think the technique that I'm really trying to embody in myself, and I've been using for years, is to not have a like napalm everything and burn it down to the ground and restart from scratch. It's it's a more alchemical approach. Interestingly enough, in the Uranus book, Jesus says this. And when I heard it, I was like, just like blown away. So this guy's asking him like, well, how do you actually help people? How do you help people see like the healing power of, God and spirituality and things like this? And he says, well, you don't remove what's wrong. What you do is you feed energy into what's right. And you do that through compassion, care, and really caring about the person. But it takes time. It takes patience for that to happen. So if you want instant gratification, you're going to be making yourself miserable. So,
right, depending on who you work for and what connects to them and what rules are put upon those people that act as, maybe the bosses. But yeah, I mean, just seeing just organic snacks at the airport, or just nurses saying, I'm not going to shoot my patients up anymore with this stuff. And I know a lot of people end up losing their lives to try and take a stand, but definitely it just seems the good is overriding and helping to transmute the negative to give those souls a chance to return to the light if they're willing. I mean, you talk a lot about and share a lot of articles about masculine and feminine dynamics and a lot of the stuff that has gotten in the way of harmony and cooperation between genders and relationships. And I know that can go into other types of agendas that we're seeing, which is a whole other thing. You can jump into that if you want to as well. But what jewels of wisdom can you share with us about this healing going on between, different polarities, and masculine and feminine, light and dark and all this kind of stuff. And I know, there's that alchemical part, but what would you say, I guess is a better way to put it, the most harmful programming that people need to begin to learn to let go of, regardless of what side, regardless of what gender? I know both might have the stereotypical ones, but if you could list the most harmful programmings between the sexes that really need to go for us to thrive as a human race, what would you want to share?
Oh boy, what a question. Let's see. I would say, well, first of all, there is an agenda to divide the sexes and destroy the human family. That was written about by Adam Weishaupt and his Francis Sabbatean cohorts when they founded the Bavarian Illuminati. So, they've had this idea of dividing the sexes for a long time. Religion has been used as a way to divide the sexes for a long time. And so one of the biggest, I'll answer this in two ways. As a general sense, the way that they control you in your relationships with your partner is through mass media, because we're hardwired to follow the instructions of what we think everybody else is doing. And if you think everybody else is living their relationship this way, then it's going to be really difficult for you not to want to follow that guidance, unless you get discerning and you create your own personal system for following that guidance, which is why you have to take power back. And they specifically divide the sexes by creating false and unrealistic relationship expectations. And then now you have an incorrect way of seeing what a relationship is supposed to look like. And so it's like trying to cook a pizza without an oven. I mean, you're not going to be successful. And so that idea in particular came out in Romanticism. So interestingly enough, this whole idea of a soulmate, that is somebody who exists, who's perfectly there, who's going to, somebody who's out there, who's perfect, you don't have to change and grow, who's going to meet all of your needs without you having to do any personal change whatsoever, is a pretty new concept that got introduced in the 1800s. And what it does is it creates this toxic expectation, which is that there's somebody out there you don't have to grow and change with, that who's perfect for you. But people aren't like that. Relationships aren't like that. They're dynamic, evolving things because people are dynamic, evolving things. And so if you're looking at the dating game and the relationship game from I have to meet somebody perfectly and they have 2 months to show me that they're perfect for me. And if they're not, then I need to ditch them and find somebody else. You're going to be miserable. You know what I mean?
Right. Totally. I mean, it makes much more sense for a soulmate to be willing to walk the path, to grow and change together, to give each other room, to love each other for who you really are, not what the other can do for you that fits your model of what perfection is. Because a lot of that, breeds this deep insecurity that can get internalized, and I feel like creates cancer and all these other diseases, because I'm not showing up correctly, or I let that person down, or, and these, narcissistic personality disorders, which you talk a lot about. Mm-hmm. Would you say that the root of a lot of illnesses is connected to this sort of thing? Because it's just not in alignment with our.
Yeah, it's a huge situation. I would say, like, particularly there's an aspect of relationships that has been under tremendous assault, which is we don't know how to nurture the good traits in our partners anymore. And so if you don't know how to nurture those good traits, your mind will use aggressive reactions to deal with a situation. There's a reason why when you're in a relationship with somebody and you feel kind of frustrated, that you kind of, this nagging part of you comes out. It's because you see something you don't like, and the part of you that deals with things you don't like at a primitive level is aggression. How do animals handle something they don't like? Well, they either run the hell away or they try to kill the thing that is attacking them, And so we're animalistic creatures. We have that neurology inside of us. But the spiritual part of us is looking to grow through openness and receptivity. And so this is one of the deepest secrets about the Cabal that they hide from people, especially relationships, is you have values, and your values are unarticulated. So, for example, you value fellowship, you value closeness, you value intimacy. Well, how are you going to express those values? They become articulated in desire. So your fantasies are specific expressions of deeper hidden values, right? And so in a relationship, we tend to get fixated on the desire part only. And if your partner can't perfectly meet your desires, well, it's like, oh, they're not the right partner for you. You got to throw them out, or you got to nag them into compliance until they finally do what you want, right? But in reality, what it's about, I would argue, is that if you can be open to changing your desires, then you can together meet your value needs. And that requires openness and change. And then you grow together as a person, as people, as souls. And I would say that's, to speak to the soul, a better definition of a soulmate, which you spoke to beautifully, is a soulmate isn't this perfect person out there who's going to meet all your needs flawlessly. A soulmate is the person who's in front of you, who's willing to go through the adventure of growth with you. And the reason that they become your soulmate is a choice of willingness, not necessarily something that was magically written into the stars. So
beautifully put. Wow, gosh. Look forward to listening to this one again. Yeah, I mean, and then there's, just a lot of the harmful things that we're raised with as children, connected to never maybe feeling, good enough. There's that expectation, but there's also, I find with a lot of clients, just feeling that you're constantly lacking, that you can never measure up because you know what the programming is and you can't meet that programming, yet you won't see it as a programming. And then when you start to wake up to the program, then you might get really mad at the programming instead of try and connect with the deeper person that exists within that needs a hello instead of the thing that might have been taken on by the father, some patriarchal program or ancestral pattern. And that's where the real hard work too comes. It's like one of the craziest learning experiences ever is relationship.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Do you think we have to be perfect? I mean, like not perfect, but do you feel it's really hard to meet those kind of partners if we haven't found our own self-love? Or do you feel that it's a mixed bag and it shouldn't be limited to these kind of philosophies where, well, you're not going to meet the one until you learn to love yourself? Or do you feel like we shouldn't stick one philosophy on multiple different expressions? Or do you feel like there's universal philosophies or truths?
I'd say, there's wisdom in a lot of what the I guess we could call the new age soulmate ideas are. So should you love yourself before you can find somebody else? Yeah, absolutely. Because if you don't know how to love yourself, even if you have somebody in your life that truly loves you, you won't be able to feel it, and you will create problems that don't exist, and you'll push that person away. And to speak to the child stuff, I mean, that is a topic. I discovered that almost all of our problems as individuals stem from this very early childhood time in our life. And that the reason why these problems happen is because of how we raise our kids and the influences that we put at them. But then talking to people about that was such an incredibly sensitive topic. It's really difficult to talk about. But basically, there's a reason, there's specific things that need to happen in the right order when a child is born. And if those things don't happen, then it's almost guaranteed to create psychological disturbances that, unless you've embodied some type of spiritual self-growth practice, you will never climb out of. And they will always be plaguing you. So yeah, self-work is tremendously important, because if you don't have the ability to humble yourself, change your mind, and really question everything that you think about, that you know who you are, then all of those little points of resistance in a relationship will create blocks and resentments that prevent you from growing together with another person. So,
well, do you feel that it's appropriate to have some people have a hidden life. They think it's okay because they need some level of sovereignty, and it's hard to just show up constantly for a relationship. Do you think it's appropriate to keep things from a partner, or do you feel it's much better to have it all out on the table so you know who you're dealing with and you know who you're making life decisions with? Do you think total transparency is important, or it's important to hold a piece for ourselves? I guess it depends what that piece would be, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I think a good ideal to strive for is total transparency. That being said, though, when you're dating somebody, you're in a relationship with somebody, even if you're like a spiritual master, they probably aren't, which means there's going to be a learning curve. And, they have things to teach you too. So you want to strive for transparency, but there's a sacredness, there's a connection between you and the creator that needs to be had in private. And so I do think that, there is a total transparency ideal, which is, hey, I need to invite you into my inner world of all the crazy things I'm thinking and reacting to. Because let's face it, there's things that get thrown into my mind that are coming from my inner child. Like, where the hell did that come from? You know what I mean?
Me too. Yeah.
But I don't want to, it's not that I want to hold that and keep that from my partner, because then I'm kind of being unauthentic, and you will feel inauthentic. If you feel something inside of you and you're not sharing it with your partner or find a way to fit, then a part of you has to keep it behind, which means you're projecting a false version of yourself, which means that's going to feel inauthentic and blah, 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 blah.
And it creates distance too.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think we should
time and place to work stuff out. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, I'll share a little bit of my personal process. I happen to be with somebody who's very open and receptive to this inner work, and I feel so blessed that I have that in my life. That being said, though, it's not just like total transparency all the time, because we come with our own baggage from life, and I need time. One of the things I try to be careful of is, as in my own personal life, for various reasons, I suppressed my inner child for many years. And so I like to use this analogy. Imagine you take a little kid and you throw them in their room for 30 years and you never talk to them. And then you go up and talk to them after 20 years. Do you think they're going to be nice and happy and like sociable and all this? No, they're going to be freaking crazy. They're going to be completely insane, right? And so I would argue most of us, because of cultural conditioning, because of the way we were raised as children, our inner child wasn't allowed to mature properly, and we had to take on a false version of ourselves to stay polite and happy. And so we had to suppress that and push it down. And so when you get into a relationship with somebody, one of the things that happens is all that inner child stuff starts to come to the surface. And it's toxic, let's face it. So, what I try to do is, in the beginning, first of all, create that safe space where I can actually bring that fullness of who I am to the table, but also prepare my partner for what is going to happen. I don't just start pulling out the lions and tigers and be like, here, you deal with it, So
that's so funny. I always like to say, when we can create a nice space, when the timing is great, because you don't want to do it when the person just comes in from a hard day's of work, or and start to really put it out there. And the most important thing is not to project and to take responsibility also. And it's such a fine line, because people have such knee-jerk triggers, and so much traumatic history. And what's so incredible is seeing how we're moving out of these dark cycles of history of going to war, separation between, families, like you said, the destruction and targeting of the family unit. And wouldn't you say this is, one of the most important things we can take on in our spiritual development is how we are, in partnerships and just our own relationship with ourselves. Like you said, breaking these agreements with things that might seem good at the time, but eventually will cause a lot of damage. So for people who are really struggling on this journey and that really are still locked in the addiction cycles and negative patternings, I know there's a lot of, really great techniques, but do you feel if a relationship is healthy enough that it can be a gentle counselor without being a dumping ground? Or do you really think that the amount of trauma we've gone through throughout history deserves some like hardcore therapy? And I guess it depends who you are, but for anybody who's really struggling, do you think they should gauge the health of their relationship on how much they can solve it themselves? Or do you think two parties have to always be willing to have an open mind to getting a third party if the love is really there and it's
Right.
getting to be too much. Because like you said, there's that default of, oh, he's not right for me or she's not right for me, I need to leave. Any suggestions for people that are struggling with the inner work that just really have, like you said, never really had the guidance? We don't have those guidance counselors or people to, give us that level of wisdom. And we're not really modeled anything from our parents because they've been struggling with the programmings too.
Right.
Yeah, just that category. And also just the healing process in general, doing the inner work and like what's most important right now. Because I know people are feeling very isolated and alone while they're in that disillusionment. Any tips or what you have seen or recommend?
Sure. Yeah, I would say to speak to the relationship challenges thing, a couple things to consider. First of all, I would say there's two kind of relationships out there. There's relationships where people are pretty stable, but it's kind of like a hermetically sealed relationship. Like they're not really too vulnerable with each other. So it's stable, but it's not really fulfilling either, right? And in those kind of situations, I think what's happening is that, let's face it, like childhood growing up is like hellish in a lot of ways. And the person that comes out of that, it's like you're like struggling to keep yourself alive and like coherent. And then you finally reach some level of stability. And going back into all of that to try to heal that can sometimes be really unsettling. And so, in a relationship with somebody, if you want that deeper level of intimate soul healing, soul growth, personal attention, and they're not, well, be respectful and don't force them. And I think, to answer one of your questions, I think we do have the ability to be open and have our needs met through other people. You know what I mean? While still maintaining a romantic connection with somebody, because relationships are evolving. They don't have to just look like the Hollywood variant or the like whatever ideal that you think of as the best and anything else is not good. You know what I mean?
The fairy tale, yeah.
Right. So, yeah, I would say at a relationship level, the core to a good relationship, in my humble opinion, is growth and playfulness and expansion. Your every part of your psychology, your neurology, your DNA is running away from stagnancy. And if your relationship is stagnating, if it's not growing, if it's not expanding, then there's something not right, and you should do something to give it more life, whatever that looks like.
Right. Yeah. And then see where you are on the other side of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to just invest what it takes and then know where enough is enough too. But it's a tough call. Some people get stuck for years and years and years and are really unhappy. And then there's the whole morality thing. And even if that person has the greatest morals and they're just really not getting their needs met, it's just, and then you're dealing with maybe a contract with the, governments and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I just love talking to you about, that kind of stuff. And when you see like the new leadership in this world and we see what's happening, I don't want to go into politics in a way that's going to make you uncomfortable, but because you're such a clear observer, and you see just this administration that we're dealing with and this kind of shift from old paradigm to new paradigm, impeachment type stuff, and sort of the political circus that we're dealing with between right and left. Do you see a big breakthrough coming? Do you see, I don't want to get you to, I don't want to put you in a corner to say anything that you would rather keep personal, but when you see kind of that government structure and the continued division, because you got one side saying this side is all satanic pedophiles and this side is, do you feel like that's a part of the agenda too, is to lose the ability to think clearly by all or nothing? Or what are your, and where do you see the government structure going, I guess is my question.
I think a grander aspect of what's happening now politically is that our addiction to external control, the Stockholm syndrome that we've been running with for so many years, is starting to break down. And it's breaking down because the trust that we've placed in our leaders is crumbling. It's more and more information is coming out showing how various political figures, whether they're on Republican or Democrat, aren't, either dishonest, they're engaged in pedophilia, they're like blackmailing people. It's all sorts of craziness that's happening. And so at a collective level, I think the idea of giving your power away to another entity to basically willfully enslave you is breaking down. Um, I think specifically what's happening with a lot of the impeachment stuff is that there's, regardless of whether you believe, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or you hate Trump or you love him or anything, I think what is pretty obvious is that there are people who are trying to push a fake narrative, and they're trying to push fake news effectively. And, in my experience, I look at things from a researcher's perspective. So if somebody's going to make a claim that this or that's happening, I'm going to go look at the evidence to see, okay, well, what's actually happening here? Because I don't blindly trust people. And in my personal research into the claims that, the president was manipulated by Russian agents and he is a Russian agent, there's no substance to that whatsoever. And as a matter of fact, it's actually a form of elaborate projection. So, for example, with the Burisma situation with Hunter Biden and his father, Hunter Biden accused and Joe Biden were basically, they had taken what they had done, which is to threaten to withdraw military aid from Ukraine as a way to strong arm a prosecutor to get fired so that Hunter Biden wouldn't get busted. And then they blamed all that on Trump. So they literally took what they did and then they put it on Trump, the scapegoat. And so now the media is just running with it. And so if you don't look at the details, then it's, it just looks like another example of why Trump's a bad guy. But if you look at the details, you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is clearly political espionage happening. And so, again, I'm not saying you should love Trump or anything like that, but you could, if you like playing fair, then you can see that what's happening now isn't nice.
And that's what's so important about having a neutral perspective. That's where we get played the most, forming attachments and fixed belief to the point where we can't hear anything else. And we stand by it to such a degree that, anything that challenges it is going to, get a bigger whack and sword. And that's the scary part with being able to see the larger picture and holding a bit of neutrality. It's not about, putting even Trump on a pedestal or he can do no wrong, or choosing the other side, which is just, hatred. If we don't have a neutral perspective, we're going to miss a lot of key things along the way. I totally agree. I mean, that happened with Eisenhower. I mean, anybody could Google ET government treaties. That's going to go right to him, but they don't know the layers upon layers upon layers. And, the things that he set up to safeguard us even, today, but, and it's, once an opinion is formed, very often a person gets fixed to it. And that's why I love talking to you so much, because you hold that. And it's such an important mind for these times. And I know, we're going to close here soon, but, as people stop being so polarized and played by these things that even some leaders might not be promoting, it's just the nature of the way the game is played, with the compartmentalism as well. In a world that is seeming to be more ascended and moving into higher earth energies, how do you kind of see the management of such huge populations? I mean, I know that there's agendas to wipe out a good portion. I know Mother Earth is going to need to do her thing and override these dark technologies that are trying to run the show. But have you ever had sort of a vision that even if you don't want to think of it, is kind of there as far as what the potential future could be for humanity if we really step up to the plate and embrace what we're made of and what we're capable of, along with the organic forces of cosmos and Earth and spirit?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of really cool things happening. I got involved with a law group several years ago when I was researching the law, and I made contact with a body of work that is just so complete and accurate that I'm just blown away. The only way I can describe it is a divine intervention, because it's just so ridiculously coherent. And I got to be careful about what I say there, because I'm actually have pledged not to share much, because we're in kind of an operational security situation. So we've got a lot happening. That being said, though, the future looks bright and fun, actually, because, politics, what politics actually is at a very deep level is it's the place where we as people get to talk about what's passionate about us so we can figure out how to protect our passions and create better ways to express them. That's effectively what a society is supposed to do. And we have not had that society for various reasons, but the tools that have emerged to control us the very legal system itself and all these various systems we have in the legal sector particularly, they're actually neutral tools. They're like a hammer. You can use a hammer to build a house, or you can use a hammer to kill somebody. Well, we've been using hammers to not do so great things over the past few years, but now we seemingly have positions at higher levels, like the spiritual level I was telling you about with the Vatican. Major changes have been happening behind the scenes there. There's, I would argue, pretty big changes happening in the political apparatus in the United States and various other sectors. We got Brexit happening in the UK. All sorts of indications that we are at a time in history where new systems are going to come online, and we're going to be able to, as people, interface with them. And so I think what as individuals we can do in this new paradigm, it's going to place a lot more burden on us as individuals to be well informed, to think about what we care about, and to think about how we're going to work with people, And so it's ultimately just the game of having fun with unity, which frankly I think is really fun.
Oh, definitely. I mean, because this is the greatest teacher. Our triggers, our judgments, when it all, much of the time comes back to the self and the things that we're struggling with. I mean, we have so much to teach each other and show each other to really rise, out of this. So seeing that timeline as being very real, and this other kind of 5G stuff, do you think it's just still bait to capture our fears and anxieties, to generate something we don't want to see because it's stolen a piece of our imaginations and our creativity?
It's like this, basically. The free will is the highest force in the universe. So the reason why we even live on a world that has been so corrupted by these things is because we, the people, have allowed them to happen in some capacity. So they're going to push 5G. They're going to push, more slavery. They're going to push all sorts of things. We have to decide as a people, do we want these things? And if we consent to them, if we sit down and we do nothing, if we cower away from having that conversation with somebody that we care and love to talk to them about these things that we think they need to hear about, then we can't make the collective choices that need to be made to free ourselves. And so while I do think that there's the forces of heaven and, extraterrestrials and timelines, they're all encouraging us. Ultimately, the tip of the spear is your free will choice, what you do with your time and what you choose to invest yourself in.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree. Because everything, we're in a relationship with everything. We got to decide who's the imposter, who do we need to divorce, and where is true, authentic love. And it has to start with not staying caught in those webs and distractions, hooks, and attachments, and trusting there's something far more beautiful and authentic. And I think that's the fear that keeps people, because they weren't taught it. What is, this isn't what our family told us, like we were talking about in the beginning, and you really, put a lot of incredible thoughts into. And yeah, so gosh, it's just absolutely amazing to talk to you. I could keep going.
Likewise.
I hope we can do this again. I know you're going to be doing something with Neil and Portal to Ascension, Neil Gar.
Mm-hmm.
Want to tell us a little bit about some of the plans you have for the year ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of really cool things happening. I have a lot happening behind the scenes right now. With Neil in particular, he and I have a podcast we do every 2 weeks called Werewolf Radio. It's broadcast live on our Facebook pages. Mine's Stillness in the Storm. His is Portal to Ascension. And eventually we'll start putting those on YouTube. And we're going to have guests. You'll actually be a guest at some point on the show, I think. So that'll be fun. We are also doing some speaking events. So he's planning some events. I'm going to help with him with these events. We're doing a world history event in Atlanta and several other events this year. So keep your eye out for that. And I am really excited, but I can't say much right now. But I've been sitting on like a ton of information that I've never really talked about publicly, dealing with like DNA, galactic history, and the nature of consciousness, like all sorts of stuff that I am working with somebody, you guys will know who when the time comes. And it's going to be basically like a docu-series about a lot of the stuff. I'm going to compile it and put it into a really engaging format. And that's going to be coming out probably in the next couple months.
Well, that's so wonderful to hear. I feel a really strong affinity to really researching junk DNA and unlocking what that's all about. And gosh, with your knowledge base and your vision of your ability to see the larger picture and the amount of immediate things that you keep your attention on. I can't wait to see, what you come out with. It's always incredible when I am able to catch your talks when I go to events, and Kevin and I are always like, what did we call him? The
Professor.
There was something more to just the word professor. But I just want to, also ask, and I'm going to put all your info about what you're going to be doing in the year ahead in your website in the description. But is there anything that we did not cover that you would like to bring up before we close?
Not necessarily anything I'd like to cover, but one thing that I just wanted to say that I don't think is said often enough and that it really inspires me when I hear it. So let me just get a little sappy with everybody real quick, is that, the universe loves you so much. It is like there are so many forces rallying to support you, and you have like an incredible destiny. What we are experiencing right now is just a small taste of what the future has in store for us as spiritual beings. So don't lose hope. Don't lose sight. There is a lot of awesome things happening, and keep your eye on the light.
Beautiful. What a wonderful way to close. Justin, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in person sometime in the near future. And everybody, thank you for joining Justin and I. And gosh, this is one to play again and again. So thanks, everybody. Okay, take care. Bye.